Hello everyone, I'm your host Toko and this is my podcast, is a verse for that. Welcome back. And I just wanted to just start off first of all, before we get into this podcast episode, I just wanted to apologize for the previous episode, just the delay that was just behind all of that, because there was a lot of technical difficulties that were just kind of just beyond me. So the episodes are up on both YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so everything will proceed as normal, hopefully. So yeah, once again, I apologize for that delay. And yeah, let's just get into this podcast episode. So we're going to be talking about Ruth and the 5 lessons that we can learn from the book of Ruth. And I think it does pertain to marriage and dating and all those other things, but I do think that it's a little bit bigger than that. I'm going to get into the technicalities that I found in the word and how this applies to us. So if I'm looking at my Bible. So if you want to join me, we're going to just be going through like an overview of the whole story. It's a pretty short book. I spread it over 4 days, but I think it is an easy read for you to get it done in like a day. But yeah, I just did it over 4 days. So starting off really strong. I wanted to just say that this book, I think, can be misinterpreted in the context of the things we're going to be talking about in the episode, but I want to just bring clarity to marriage and things pertaining to that, and how I think the overarching thing is just 2 things: how God is the grand master of everything, including our love lives, and also that our marriages, if God has destined for us to be married, are bigger than us. So yeah, I want to get into that. I want to get into all of those things, but starting off strong, I wanted to just start chapter by chapter. This is how it's going to work. Chapter by chapter, we're going to pull out like one lesson, and there's going to be this one big lesson that overarches the entire story. Because if you're not familiar with the book itself, it only has 4 chapters, and the 5th one is, I think, the big, I guess, reveal, if I may say so. So yeah, the first lesson I want to talk about is how Ruth and her sister in marriage, Orpah, they have differing levels of loyalty, in the sense that Ruth, as we know famously, or if we don't know, she has this undying loyalty to Naomi that is reminiscent of how God is loyal to us. But I do think that there's a certain level of loyalty that is so expected of us, and just nice, and I think Orpah kind of falls into this category where we do what is expected of us. We give loyalty to a certain degree, to a point where it's pleasant. And I do think that her deciding to go on a separate go on her merry way, as opposed to following Naomi, the mother in marriage that both Ruth and Orpah were connected to, shows, I think, the level of loyalty that the world decides is good. And I think this is purely circumstantial loyalty, like, oh, I'll follow you to this extent, I'll be loyal to you to this extent. But I don't think it is as undying as Ruth's loyalty, I beg your pardon. And I think this is the first lesson that I think is important for us to realize, that there's going to be a time where we're going to have to show our undying loyalty, not just in marriage or to our husbands or wives, but also to God, because God is more loyal than anyone and anything in the world. So it's important that we mirror that to Him and to other people. So yeah, that's the first lesson I wanted to start off with, and really just start there and realize that God is the author of loyalty. Because I think if you think about it practically, He was loyal to His covenants throughout the entire story of the Bible. He started a covenant with Adam, Abraham, and all these other people, and it culminated to Jesus. And it didn't even end there. Jesus gave us the covenant of the breaking of bread, and even at that, the covenant that God made with all these people in the Bible extended onto us, people who are not Israelites in the traditional sense. So that is the evidence of God's loyalty in the form of faithfulness. And I think it's important that we are constantly mirroring that in the world and to Him. So yeah, the second lesson I want to get into is how Ruth was a really hard worker. And this is in chapter 2, where she goes out into Boaz's field. She is just really modeling out what a Proverbs 31 woman is. She's waking up, she's, working so hard. And I think this is where the technicality between what Boaz did and what people think Boaz did is very important. Because what he did was basically this: he told his young men, don't harass her, and in fact leave some stuff for her to leave some like grain for her to pick up. And I think it's so easy to see that as, oh, he was trying to make things easier for her. Yes, but I do think that it's also to say that he was encouraging her to pursue her duty as a woman of God, as a Proverbs 31 woman. She was someone who was so dedicated to making a way, a means of living for her and Naomi, and it had to come with hard work. And so I want people to realize that, I'll say women or ladies, that I think the man of God that God has for us has to be someone that is not just going to make life easy for you, but is going to encourage you in your hard work to pursue what God has for you, because it's important that we are modeling out the Proverbs 31 woman. I cannot say Proverbs 31 woman diligently, but I do think that our man of God can help us and come alongside us to support us. And I think what Boaz was doing here was not just to, take away from her, or I think, just to put it in layman's terms, I think he was trying to stop misogyny and sexism in its tracks, because for him to say to his men, and the fact that he also had several other women working in his field, I think he was trying to create a culture of like, hey, we don't do this, we don't work like this, we don't work like the way, we don't harass women, we don't harass the young women that are coming to this, in Ruth's case, fend for themselves and their family. We are supposed to be set apart. And I think it points to Boaz's integrity, where it was not just about him, but it was also about his reputation and his business and those he was leading. So the man that God has for you, young woman, has to be someone who models after Boaz in this way, where he is able to raise up a standard of people to say, yeah, you may be used to how the world drinks or parties, but here we pray. I want people who are covenant to God. And I think, side note, we're going to get into this in the fifth lesson, but I do think that it shows how God's characters were in him without God explicitly having to tell him. And I think that's a mark of integrity. So that's a very, very, very big attribute of Boaz that I think is important to be looking out for in a guy, and really just in marriage, I guess. I'm not married. This is what the Lord is telling me. But I think it shows how God is always working. He's always someone that is, Jesus said it in, I believe it's in Mark. He said, my Father and I are always working. And I think when we look at how that is represented in the story of Ruth and Boaz, Ruth was someone who was coming to work for her and her mother-in-law, and Boaz was a successful businessman who had to have been working hard. So I think the both of them came in this almost union before they even were united of hard work, and modeling out that the work is always plenty and the workers are few. The field is so abundant, like Jesus was talking about, and I believe it's in Mark, where he's talking about, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. There's so much work to be done in the kingdom of God, and we have to be able to go into that. And I think when we are uniting with people that are meant for us, it's important for us to realize that we have to have our own purposes, that where God is continually pushing us to work harder, pushing us to, giving us opportunity and providence to work, and also that other person that we're going to be joining in union with, also having those encounters with God. And having that union is important, because these two people were working for one cause at the field. And I think in this case, in our day and age, the field can mean a plethora of things for us. It could mean maybe you're coming alongside someone who has a IT business, and here you are working with them, and you're both working to bring glory to God in IT. This is just an example, but I think it can just be in every single purpose that we have. And I think that's why, side note, I think that's why a lot of people on the Christian relationship YouTube side will always talk about how your purposes have to align, because this was their purposes aligning. So yeah, I think this is just something that was so important for me to say, because I think for the most part, I think that people can be delusional in terms of Boaz's role in Ruth's life. Going on to the next lesson number 3. This is chapter 3, where Ruth goes into the threshing floor and lays at Boaz's feet. And I think what was really, really important here is Ruth's reputation. I beg your pardon. Ruth's reputation of her being someone who goes out of her way to maintain that, while also following her mother-in-law's advice. Because yes, she was loyal, but she had a reputation to uphold of loyalty, and part of that reputation meant also just being a woman who kept her integrity as well. And I think this is where we see her learning a bit from Boaz's integrity, because she leaves early. Yes, she laid at his feet. Nothing happened, no sneaky link. It was a means to say, yeah, I'm here, I'm ready to be, your wife. I think in that, even just in that, self-control and being able to keep integrity and purity, let's just be honest, keeping the purity between the two of them, she still decided to uphold her reputation. She left before people could see faces, it says in the word, in the last few verses of this chapter, where it talks about how she left in the morning before anyone could see her. And I want us to realize that yes, she had a reputation to uphold, but I think also her loyalty is starting to amalgamate with her potential husband here, Boaz, where she was loyal to her mother-in-law. Now she has to be loyal to the instructions Boaz told her in this moment where they're at the threshing floor at his feet, when she was laying at his feet. And I think why I was reiterating loyalty and reputation so much is because her reputation of loyalty had to transcend over every single element of her life at that point, which means that she was not only just loyal to her mother-in-law, but she was also now loyal to Boaz, in the sense that she had to show and uphold her reputation of loyalty to him, in the sense of keeping his instructions to her and also keeping the instructions that Naomi gave her. So yeah, I think what we can learn from this is that we as women of God do have a certain caliber of loyalty and reputation to uphold. That's why things like modesty are meant to be upholded, and things like just being the Proverbs 31 woman. I don't mean to use that as a glamorizing thing, but I do think that it's important to realize that it's very real. Being a Proverbs 31 woman is something that is not just a Christian girly, like clean girl aesthetic. It's a real thing that needs to be implemented before marriage, during, and hopefully not, but after marriage. So that reputation of what Christian women are supposed to be is meant to be upholded even in the process of marriage. And I think I'm saying this to say that just because you know who your husband is, just because someone has proposed or you have a boyfriend, doesn't mean you have to start tarnishing your reputation as God's daughter just so that you can, speed up the process or indulge in, I'll just say it, sexual desires, because I think people don't even realize how dangerous it is dating, because I think that's a secular term or a secular concept that we have in our society. And because of just how influenced we are by the world, I'm not saying dating is a bad thing, I'm just saying it's not necessarily completely biblical. I think because of that, people can start blurring the lines between holiness and unholiness, or impurity and purity, where, oh, dating is not a biblical thing, so I'm going to do this. No, there are still concepts that can be upheld before, during, and after dating, before, during, and after marriage, that can transcend the unknown. So, yeah, I think this is the moment where she has this decision to make of whether or not she's going to, number one, follow the instructions of both the people that she's being loyal to, and number two, uphold her reputation. So I'm just saying, young woman of God, uphold your reputation and be loyal. Be loyal to what God has told you about your husband or your marriage situation. Be loyal to the people that are of wisdom to you, because I think one thing that we need to also take note of is that Naomi was a woman of wisdom. She came and told Ruth what to do, her lineage, and to have a redeemer, because the whole reason why she sent Ruth to go to the threshing floor is to have a redeemer. And back then it was basically like, I would say, if you haven't watched Bridgerton, this won't make sense to you, but I would say it's kind of like how it the men would still acquire the estate of the woman even if she's more wealthy than him. Like if you have, say for example, I have more money than my potential suitor, regardless of whether or not I have the money, he's still going to acquire my wealth and make it his own in a way. And this was kind of happening at this time where the men were in charge of the land and all these other things. So even though the land was in Ruth's name, it was technically in her husband's name, and it had to be passed down to another man. And since Naomi had lost her sons, Ruth's husband, and what was her name, Orpah's husband, her sons, and her own husband, they had to look for someone to redeem them. So that was the role of Boaz, and that's what Naomi was looking at. She saw Boaz's character, even in the fact that she would always, Ruth, she would always come home with grain and all these other things. Like even right after this moment of Ruth lying at his feet, he sends her with so much grain, like all this grain. It says here in the word that in verse 15 of chapter 3, it says, "Then Boaz said to her, 'Bring your cloak and spread it out.' He measured 6 scoops of barley into the cloak and placed it on her back. Then he returned to the town." So he was still someone who was providing for them. And Naomi saw that and I was like, oh, this man is definitely generous, yes. But he was also doing things that he didn't have to do because he's a man of integrity. And I think it can be seen as like, oh, the bar is so low, but genuinely this is the righteous bar where someone has to be, for me and for the men of God that God has for you guys, and also the men of God that you guys, if the guys that are listening or watching, that you guys have to be people of integrity, people who are, yes, generous, but not in a sinful way. It has to be in a way that is of God and of integrity. There are lots of rich people who are generous, but what is the heart posture behind their generosity? Are they doing it to appear a certain way, or are they doing it because it's the right thing to do? Are they doing it because they want to appease the masses, or are they doing it because it's the righteous thing to do? So yeah, I just wanted to kind of speak on that. I think Naomi was a voice of reason and wisdom that Ruth definitely needed. And I guess, I don't want to put it this way, but I think it would make the most sense. I guess her loyalty did pay off in the sense that she did get wisdom from an older woman, someone who has gone through marriage, and she's coming to her hometown because the town that they're in is Naomi's hometown. So Ruth was going, the whole reason why Ruth followed her is because this was her home. This was Naomi's hometown, and she had left her hometown because she had the opportunity to go back to her hometown, Ruth, but she decided to follow Naomi, and this was probably foreign to her. She's in a foreign land, and she definitely needed somebody to guide her, and that was Naomi. So I think for us women, and even just men out there, I think it's important to have women who can speak into our lives concerning these things. And for me, it's my mom. She's always, speaking into my life regarding these things. And I think we can be as wise as possible. We can have as many Bible studies, or read as many Bible plans concerning marriage, listen to as many Christian dating podcasts, or watch as many Christian dating YouTube videos. But I think nothing beats, number one, God's wisdom, and also nothing beats the wisdom that God gives in the people that he gives us to have speaking to our lives. He gives us people to speak into our lives that have this unbeatable, for lack of a better word, unbeatable wisdom. Because in the book of Ecclesiastes, he talks about how there's natural wisdom that comes from aging and experiencing life. And in this case, coming back to the context here, what better wisdom is there than somebody who has experienced this marriage thing and has seen it through? So yeah, I think it's really, really important to have people speaking to our lives in our Christian life. So the second last lesson I want to touch on is on the man. And I think when we think about Ruth, we just think about the loyalty, but I don't think we talk much about Boaz and his character, because he's someone that is, I think, kind of like a good archetype besides Jesus of what a man of God should look like. I don't even know much about his life, but his character shines through and makes up for that. So we know that Boaz and this, in the final chapter, Boaz and this other redeemer who is literally unnamed, he has this opportunity to either betray his integrity and to say, I'm going to take Ruth to be my wife, because, just side note for some context here, this other redeemer is a closer relative to Naomi that would have the right or a closer right to be their redeemer. So basically how it would work was that the closer you were to the family who needed redeeming, the higher chances you would have to redeem them. So since Boaz was like below this redeemer, he had to do the right thing, and he did that. He presented this opportunity to this man, and the thing that he says that really like touched me, I guess, was that he says, "Oh, my friend, I need to talk to you." He was able to put his reputation above his feelings and emotions. How many times have we seen guys? And I'm watching a show where the main guy, is a little bit emotional, and it's not really attractive to me. Being overly, I guess, just emotional, like unnecessarily emotional, isn't something that is godly, because it can lead you to make decisions that are not of God. The heart is deceitful above all things, so making decisions from your heart is deceit. So what Boaz was able to do, he tells this man, like, "Oh, my friend, I need to talk to you," and he lays it out plain. He doesn't play games. He doesn't do anything crazy. He doesn't have this scheme. He's not like Jacob. Shout out Jacob. We love Jacob. But he's still someone who can present things as they are and put his feelings at bay so that the truth can win out, so that the right thing can be done. And that's something that we should all be looking for. So that was the extent of his integrity, because essentially, just to wrap it up, he was basically saying, if I don't get to marry you, then this is the right thing. It's like, even if this doesn't happen, at least I did the right thing. And I don't know how many guys who could actually stand by that and be like, I'm going to let the Lord's ways, because it said it was custom for this to happen. I'm going to let the Lord's ways to take over my own emotions. And that's hard. I think it was hard. I think it's definitely hard, because he knew the situation. He had spoken to Ruth the night before, and I think he could have done what I think a lot of guys would have done, and I guess he'd still be the man at the end of the day, but he still went out of his way to preserve his integrity, and that's definitely a characteristic that we need to be looking out for. So I think, coming back to what I was saying, I think what was really, really important as well for Boaz was him being set apart for the marriage. And I think we think about being set apart and being different in the woman context, but also being set apart in the male context is important, because here we have two redeemers. Both of these men are upright men, because the second redeemer says, "Oh, I can't step in because it might mess up with my own estate." He says in verse 6 of chapter 4, "I can't redeem it," the family redeemer replied, "because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the family." So I think what was being said here was that he was someone also who was full of integrity, because he was aware of what the implications were, and he decided to relinquish control. So I think it highlights how there were two people. And in many cases in the world, there can be many people out there that can be man of God, but God calls a man of God to be your husband. We can pray for a man of God, but I think it's important to pray for our men of God. I think it's important to realize that just because he's cute, just because he's Christian, doesn't mean that he's your Christian man. Just because he's a man of God, even if he's the most on-point person, he has checked all your boxes on your list, I think it's important to ask the Lord whether or not he's the one he has for you. Because I think that a lot of people go through so many bad breakups that could have been avoided just by asking the Lord whether or not that person was for them. I think that segues into my last point, that God orchestrated everything. Throughout this book, you only see God being mentioned like 4 times. And there's only at the end, it is explicitly said what he did, because he caused Ruth to fall pregnant. It says in verse 13 of chapter 4, it says, "So Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant." This is the first time that the Lord is doing something than in the explicit sense. So when God is orchestrating something behind the scenes, sometimes it can be like a divine revelation, and sometimes it can just be him putting you with someone, and you have to genuinely seek his face and seek his answer. Because in this case, it wasn't necessarily said like, "Oh, Ruth, you will marry Boaz," or "Boaz, take Ruth as your wife." But I do think that God's providence is definitely highlighted, because there are instances where it says that, oh, she found herself at this field, and it was just divine appointment for them to meet. And I guess destiny, and I think that's what makes a lot of Christian girls swoon, like, oh my gosh, God really just orchestrating everything and, aligning things to be destined. And, I think girls really love destiny. Like, oh, it's just a match made in heaven, we're meant to be. And this is also one of those cases, but in the biblical sense. So yeah, I think when we realize how much of a hand God has in marriage and how much of a hand he has in our relationships, I think we need to then realize that he is faithful and we should trust him. Because if I was Ruth, and you catch wind that your man or your potential man has someone else that is a closer relative to your estate or the person that you're aligned to, I would be scared. Like, Lord, what is this? But then Naomi tells her in the end of chapter 3, she tells her in the very last verse, she says, then Naomi said to her, just be patient, my daughter, until we hear what happens. The man won't rest until he has settled things today. She assures him that Boaz is a man of integrity and to be patient. And God is telling us the same thing, I feel like. He's telling us that we should be patient. We should be people who are practicing the fruit of the Holy Spirit in patience. So, yeah, I think I say this because there is a lot of overwhelming energy when it comes to marriage and like kingdom spouses, where people want to meet their kingdom spouse and like they're trying to manipulate the situation for it to happen. But it goes against the literal Bible, where Ruth was just doing her thing. She was just having being this person who is just so loyal and upholding a reputation, that a man came to her. A man literally was aligned by God for her to meet. So I don't think we should be trying to manipulate the situation, even if maybe in some instances your kingdom spouse has been revealed. Let God handle the meeting. Let God handle how it's all going to play out, because he already has. We have to trust him. So yeah, I just wanted to really break down the kingdom spouse thing, and not necessarily shut it down, but more so just bring a bit more clarity. I think I said in the beginning where we need to be looking at biblical examples. Yes, it's important to heed to prophecy, but it's more important to test it out. More important to test it against scripture. Ask the Lord what he meant by that. And I think prophecy should never speak out of left field when God isn't already speaking about in your life or in any situation. So yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of touch base on this and conclude on the point that marriage is bigger than us, because the very last part of this book talks about the descendants of Boaz. And I think the reason why the Lord makes his explicit entrance here is that when he talks about enabling Ruth to be pregnant, it's because this was meant to preserve the line of David. Because the book literally ends, verse 22 of chapter 4, it says, Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David in Boaz's lineage. So I do think that marriage is bigger than us. It's something that is sacred, yes, and it involves us, but there is a bigger purpose at stake. In this case, it was in the case of preserving the line of David. How many times, I think, how much more productive would we be if we realize that our kingdom spouse and us have a greater purpose to play than just a wedding and the fluff of a marriage. We have a purpose to play, and I can't tell you, I cannot tell you what your purpose is in the kingdom of God, but I definitely assure you that there is a purpose, because in the same chapter, it talks about when Ruth did give birth to this child. It says in verse 11, it says, then the elders and all the people standing in the gate replied, we are at witness. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, whom all the nation of Israel descended. May you prosper in Ephrath and be famous in Bethlehem. May the Lord give you descendants by this young woman, who will be like those of our ancestor Perez, the son of Tamar and Judah. So this child, this union, the product of their union, would be a big, big part in the birth of David, the most iconic king next to Jesus, obviously. But yes, and obviously through the line of David, we would have Jesus. So our marriages, essentially, my last point is that our marriages should point to Jesus and the purpose of Jesus, because we all have a charge to make disciples of many nations. And obviously in marriage, that can look like be fruitful and multiply. Like that's one of the stems of that, because I think from what I've observed from a lot of people in my life and people that I've observed that I follow on, in the Christian community, I think a lot of the people who have children talk about how their discipleship and their leadership starts in their homes. So with that information, I think it's very, very natural to assume that we have a responsibility to play in our marriages, in our relationships with our children, our future children, because those determine how we lead in the open and public ministries. Because I think when we are able to have transparency and integrity in both public and private ministries, or our global corporate ministry versus our personal homely ministries, I think that creates a level of faithfulness that shows the presence of God. So yeah, I just wanted to help people realize that marriage is not a joke. It's not something that is an add-on. It's something that is serious, and God takes it very seriously. That's why we have so many laws regarding marriage in the Bible. We have so many customs regarding marriage, like divorce and adultery. Our union should remind us of our union with God. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of speak on that and really just, I guess, bring clarity, like I said, and also help women start changing their perspective of marriage, because I think we have kind of spoken about it a lot to the point where it starts to lose its meaning, to the point of not seeing the implications behind it. So yeah, I just wanted to encourage people out there to keep being women of God who are of integrity, who are heeding to Lord's instructions. Obviously, being a Proverbs 31 woman, that's important. So I thank you so much for listening, and please go and spend alone time with God. That's very important. And I love you, and most importantly, the Lord loves you.